The silence breaks. A laugh not of this world echoes through the man's home, chilling to the bone. This laugh belongs to Linda, but it's twisted, alien, a sound that no human should utter. In that moment, terror takes form. It's not just a story. It's the Mann family's living nightmare, a sinister force making itself known through one of their own. Here, in Lake Wales, Florida, a house turns into a battleground against an unseen horror. This tale isn't just about hauntings. It's about the chilling realization that the person beside you might no longer be themselves. Your skin crawls, your pulse races. Are you ready to face the darkness within?
Welcome back to Retraced Echoes. As always, I'm your host. My name is Bert, and as you heard in the introduction, today's story is going to take us on quite a ride. It's a story straight out of 1992. The 90s were the good years, boys and girls. Now, anyone that knows me knows that one of my favorite shows of all time is Unsolved Mysteries. Not any Unsolved Mysteries, Robert Stack's Unsolved Mysteries. I'm sorry to anyone that's not Robert Stack that's on Unsolved Mysteries. Those are just my favorite. Now, occasionally on those episodes, there would be stories about ghosts or demons or spirits. Now, today's podcast is going to be one of those episodes. Now, also, if you've been around me any length of time, you know that I've had my own personal experiences in the past, and that caused me to have somewhat of an interest in the paranormal. Now, this is also why I typically look for other stories. I try to rationalize my own experiences. Now, I understand if I watch this, maybe I'll come across something that explains what I saw or what I heard or potentially what I felt. Experiences that for me means that it's not so isolated. Unsolved Mysteries for me was always a little bit more tangible. It gave me other people's experiences to where I could say, yeah, I've had that. I've dealt with that. I've experienced that. In fact, if we're being completely honest, both of my podcasts was somewhat started because of Unsolved Mysteries. My other podcast, Deceptive Reality, I co-host that with a buddy of mine. His name is Nick. That show was almost completely inspired from Unsolved Mysteries. That said, when we look at Unsolved Mysteries, what is it? It's a great story that's mixed with a great voice, Robert Stack. That is a recipe for, in my opinion, something that's amazing. That, and again, I got an opportunity to see things that fascinated me. Now, if you want to see the story that we're going to be talking about tonight, you can find that real easy. It's the Halloween episode, season 6, episode 6. What I've created today, I hope, is something that you'll enjoy maybe as much as. That's what I'm striving for anyway. I'm going to retell the story, but also weave in the voices from the past. And the way that I'm going to do that is, obviously, if you've watched Unsolved Mysteries in the past, you know that they'll typically do interviews and they try to recreate the story. I've taken those voices, I've recreated them exactly the way that they did the interviews, and I did it with my own voices. So what you're hearing is not the exact voices of the people that talk today, but it was exactly what they said and the tone that they said it. And if they had an accent or anything like that, that also is translated in these voices. So if you enjoy this, please in the comment down below, tell me if you like it better than what we've done in the past. Maybe this is the format that we go going forward. We want to continue to grow and move this channel along. Also, if you've not subscribed to the channel, you better doggone subscribe. I'm watching you. Also, if you have a story that you'd love me to look into, don't hesitate to tell me. It's hard for me to try to find all these different stories every single week. So if there's something that you want to hear that you've not heard, let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you're not listening to my podcast on the YouTube machine, just understand, in the future, I'm going to be reacting to maybe some ghost videos that I find, and I want to kind of give my thoughts around the paranormal in those videos. Do I think it's real? Do I think it's fake? If there's a video that you would love to see me cover, also, man, I've got you guys in the comments a whole bunch, but drop the link in the comments below. Let me try to figure out if it's a video that maybe I want to go into. I might do one this week. I don't know. We'll see. Now, I'm very obviously excited about the future of the podcast, the YouTube channel, TikTok channel that we have going on, but enough about me, enough about what I've got planned. Let's stop talking about the tale. Let's be about the tale. Let's go. Now, our story begins in a very unassuming house located in Lake Wales, Florida. As I said earlier, the year is 1992, and everything about this story is going to kind of revolve around one man. You're going to see that as the story goes on. It's a 19-year-old named Alan Mann. Now, he lives in this house with his parents, which kind of works out to a degree because he works the late night shift. That leaves the days free for him to do anything that he wants to completely alone through the day. Now, our story is going to begin with Alan pulling into the driveway after working all day.
I had the afternoon off. I'd come home, and I guess it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I finally gotten some sleep.
Alan, who was fast asleep in his bedroom, would be awoken by something that would begin a cycle of events that would forever change his life. He was being pulled from his deep sleep as he heard,
Alan! Alan! Wake up, Alan! Alan, get up!
Now, Alan leaned up, his eyes focused, but he was completely confused on what he saw. He said it was a woman that was in her mid-30s, maybe late 40s, and she was staring at him straight from the doorway. He couldn't move. This was not someone that he knew. This was a stranger. There had to be so many things that was going through his mind. If it was me, I would think that the first thing that I would think is someone broke into my house, but this person knew his name. They were calling him, Alan, wake up. So I guess the next thing I would think if someone was like, hey, Bert, wake up, Bert. And I woke up and I looked over and I'm like, who's this woman that's like 30 or 40 years old in my house? I would think, well, maybe it's family friend. Like maybe family came over and they brought this person to come wake me up. I guarantee probably the last thing that would ever go through my mind, especially in a case like this, is that it's a ghost. I mean, they had lived in this house for a while. They never had an experience like this before. What if Alan was just dreaming? Maybe this was all just a dream. Well, you know that's not true. This would be the shortest podcast that I've ever created if that was the case. But to Alan, he's probably sitting there going, pinch, pinch. Am I sleeping? It would have to be a completely confusing sight. But just as Alan fixated on the entity, well, let me have him explain what happens next.
The figure turned away from the door like it was leaving. And by the time I got up and walked 3 paces to the door, I don't know what happened. It just turned a corner and disappeared.
When Alan's family got home, he had to tell them. Now, by his family, I mean his mom, his dad. He didn't have any siblings, so it was him and his 2 parents for the total of 3 of them. But anyway, how do you tell your parents? You know, people that's lived there the entire time with you, they've never had an experience. How do you be like, hey, mom, hey, dad, saw a ghost? Well, he did the very best that he could. And I'm pretty sure you all are not surprised by this. They didn't believe him. How do you believe such a thing? Now, in the days that followed, nothing else really happened. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, so on and so forth. All the talks about ghosts and seeing things that go, I guess for Alan, bump in the day, they were out of everyone's mind. A distant memory, some would say. But this was all about to change in a flash. Listen to those wedding bells. Alan got married to a girl that he was seeing and she moved right in. Now, this wasn't necessarily uncommon. Back then in the early 90s, money was still relatively tight. It was not easy to come by. And Alan's only 19. His wife was only 16. So it's not like they would have moved right out. My guess is they probably did not have a lot of things prepped. So now a house of 3 became a house of 4. It was Alan, his new wife, Linda, his mom, Sandra, and his dad, David. So 4 of them are now living in the household. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, Alan worked the night shift. This was not an easy dynamic for a new marriage. But my guess is he was trying probably to prep for them to leave. The new bride was typically left at home with the mom. So Linda and Sandra, they would typically sit in the living room and watch a little bit of TV. If anything, it gave them a little bit of an opportunity to connect, relax after a long day, and they would enjoy a show between the 2 of them. Now, Sandra, she was about to experience something that would turn that previous skepticism for Alan all the way around. She and her little dog was sitting on the couch. Now, Linda, she was on the other side of the room. She was sitting in a chair. Unfortunately, Linda, I believe, was probably just far enough out of line of sight to see exactly what was going to happen next.
I had my little dog, Prince, beside me, and he was laying on a pillow. And I looked down at the end of the couch, and I saw this white smoky thing, and the first thing I thought was fire. Well, by that time, the dog had gotten up on his feet, and it just disappeared. When Prince came back, I said, "Oh, Prince, we've got company." And this is when Linda snapped around and like, what's going on?
The once ever so skeptical Sandra had now also had an experience that she could not explain. Something that she had never experienced in her entire life. Now, Alan didn't seem so crazy in her mind. Now, unfortunately, Linda was on the other side of the room. She didn't see any of this. She obviously heard the aftermath, looked around, but it was too late. That experience, it was already gone. Now even though she didn't experience it, she had no doubt that Sandra truly did experience this. Also, she completely believed Alan, so she knew that there was something going on in this house. Linda and Sandra, they couldn't wait until the next morning to tell Alan about the experience that they had when he got home from work. I said their experience. I guess it was more of Sandra's experience. Linda was just along for the ride, but listen, she was still there. Now, of course, after hearing all this, Linda and Alan, they kind of wanted to get to the bottom of understanding exactly what was going on in the house. So they turned to a friend of theirs who had a Ouija board. Now, I know there's going to be some of you that's going to say something in the comments. Every time I bring up a Ouija board, there's always a ton of skeptics that jump in. Y'all are like the most boisterous people I've ever seen in my entire life. So before we dig too deep into the story, let me answer something here that I know if I don't, I'm going to have to answer later. As far as my belief system in Ouija boards, I don't know what to believe. At a minimum, I would say I'll do whatever I can to stay away from them. Now, many of you skeptics love to tell me that they're nothing more than a board game that's made for a child. I am extremely well aware. Just so, again, we're all on the same page, we're talking about boards that's been around for centuries, long before they can ever be traced back to the original novelty company that produced them for the first commercialized copy of the Ouija board. Now, the board itself, if we're being honest, is just a way of communicating with the outside, or I guess, yeah, the outside to communicate with us. That's probably the best way to put it. Now, I know that a big part of this, it happened after the modern spiritual movement. Now, that was many moon ago. I couldn't even tell you when that was here in the United States. And I believe it all started with the Fox sisters. They had a way of trying to communicate with these spirits. And that was typically through tapping that would occur. Now, back then, I would say that was probably very similar to the boards, right? So I know that they had 3 different sets of taps, one for yes, one for no, and I believe one for maybe. There's been a series of different people that's done this in the past, but they're probably the most prevalent that I know of. But I also believe that they did an alphabet version too. So it's like, I'm going to go through the alphabet. Stop me when we hit the letter A, B, C, D, tap, 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 tap. Okay, it's D. Now let's go to the next letter. Now that kind of sounds eerily familiar to a certain pair of ghost investigators that's out there now. Now, it's only fair to bring up that the Fox sisters, they eventually did confess to making it all up. They admitted that it was all just a big hoax. They said that they popped joints, they tapped with their toes. Maybe they did both, I can't remember. That said, many spiritualists will point out that the sisters, when they said this, they were strapped for cash. They didn't have any money. It's also important to explain that they were paid very well to admit that they were fabricating it, that they were hoaxing it. Now, later on, they said that they were lying about the entire thing being fake, that they made it all up. They did it only to get paid. Now, the problem with them saying this is it's kind of like the little boy that cried wolf. You never truly know, okay, so which one's real? Was a ghost really tapping? Was he just popping joints? The real truth may never be known. We will never truly understand what was going on with the foxes. Now, I guess it's easy to say we'll never know what's going on with the foxes, but people that do this now or in the future, we may know. Now, do I believe if it was real or if it was fake? My honest answer, I have no clue. If I had to lean a certain direction, I would probably lean more towards it being a hoax. But I have no clue. They are, in my mind, though, the very first version of a Ouija board. So the next thing you would probably say is, well, Bert, if you're leaning towards the Fox sister being fake, why do you believe potentially in a Ouija board? I don't know what to believe, to be honest, but I can tell you this much. There's going to be a certain day that I'm probably going to start ghost hunting, and I'm going to bring some of that to this channel. I will never use a Ouija board. I think that just opens doors up that we don't want, right? I mean, let's think about the Ouija board for just a second. There are things that's sold every single day that's used not for the intended purpose that they were created. Just because a Ouija board was sold as a toy doesn't make it any less dangerous spiritually. If you believe in this kind of thing at all, you understand that entities will use whatever they can to get your attention or to try to communicate. Probably the best example of this is as a person who's dealt with people inside of the hospitals at certain stages in my life, right? When we lose the availability to be able to communicate vocally, we always try to find a way. How many times have you heard a story of someone in the hospital that cannot communicate, but they're squeezing somebody's hands, they're blinking? To think that we try to do that by default as just mere humans, but if there is something on the other side that they are also not trying to communicate, I think that's extremely foolish. But anyway, let's get back to the story. So we got Alan, we got Linda, and a friend that brought the Ouija board. They want to try to communicate with whatever's on the other side. They're going to try to figure out who or what was trying to get their attention. As the three of them sat around the Ouija board, they each placed a hand on the planchette. They began asking questions. They asked things like, are you a man or are you a woman? And the planchette, I guess I only need one hand. The planchette began to slide across the board. W-O-M-A-N. Spelled out woman. Next most important thing that you could probably ask it, what's your name? Again, the planchette began to move. C-R-A-M-E-R. Spelled out Kramer. Now, Linda, she felt very strongly about what they were getting from the board.
The board talked real good with me. I believed in it. I've believed in that kind of stuff for a while, but I never come across it until then.
Now, obviously, they continued to ask more questions, but Linda and Alan, they had all they really needed. They knew that it was a female ghost. I guess they didn't know it was a ghost. They knew it was a female, and they knew her name was Kramer. Now, that evening, there was still one person in the family that they had to convince. Alan believed he was the first one. Linda was told from Alan about what was going on. She believed. And Sandra just had her experience, so she believed. But David? He might take a little bit more coaxing. Now, to say that David wasn't having any of this is an understatement. He didn't want to hear about this crazy ghost talk. Not in his house. They had been living there this entire time and had never once experienced anything.
I thought I was living with a bunch of flakes. I really didn't want to be involved in it. I just kind of sloughed it off and didn't bother with it. And I just, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. If it was a paranormal experience or something like that, I didn't want to have to worry about it. I just didn't want to admit it.
The good old days, the 90s, when you could tell your family that they're all a bunch of flakes. Man, I miss the 90s. Now, David is what I would probably call a deep skeptic. He was the kind of man that he would need a lot more than someone telling him they had some type of ghost experience. He would need to have something himself. He certainly didn't want to open any kind of doors to the supernatural. You just heard that. He just wanted to have a normal life, and he wanted to live it in peace. But peace, it was not about to be found in this house. In fact, it was about to take a turn into something that sounds like it came straight out of the Twilight Zone. One night, Linda and Alan, they were laying in bed. They're watching a little late night TV. As they laid in bed, they were all cuddled up with each other. Linda began making some very weird noises. This was not like Linda at all.
Are you okay?
Linda's entire face changed. A very ominous smile came across her face, and her eyes fixated on Alan as she laughed. She reached over, she removed the glasses from Alan's face, and she laid them on the nightstand. Now, Alan was completely confused. He asked Linda if she was okay. He had never seen Linda like this. She just looked back. She had a very wild smile. She kept laughing. Now, she reached for the light. She flipped it off. Now, the only light that was coming in there was from the TV that was at the end of the bed. I guess for them, the end of the bed's this way. She looked him deep in the eyes and continued to laugh as she attempted to become intimate with him.
I was laughing. So yeah, I knew he had laugh. I had never heard. You know, it didn't even sound like her. She has this squeaky little giggle, and this was almost an evil laugh.
Now, Alan's parents, they was on the outside. They was listening through the door like the good old days when they had the cup up to the door. That was kind of what was going on. Their minds was going wild about what could potentially be going on in this bedroom. I mean, think about it. Why would they be this obvious? That was very unlike Linda and Alan. I mean, I get they're married, but they probably didn't want to hear it in their household. Now, Sandra, she started speculating that maybe what they were hearing on the other side of the door was not what one's imagination might believe. Now, inside the bedroom, Alan was so confused and lost. He didn't understand what was going on with Linda at all. He had to fight back. I mean, Linda, she was such a small woman, but she was able to hold him down pretty easily.
She was holding me down, and, you know, normally she can't hold one hand down with both of her arms. And, you know, I tried to get away, and it seemed to make her more violent. And she started putting more force on my arms, so I pushed against her, slammed her against the wall 3 times, and she finally released me.
Alan had never needed to protect himself against Linda, but he knew deep down inside, whatever this was, whatever was fighting with him, that was not Linda. Now, after Linda broke her grasp from Alan, it would only lead to more questions than to answers.
She put her head on my shoulder again and started talking and, you know, picked up the conversation exactly where she left off before she snapped.
Now, let's think about this for just a moment. You've got Linda that's 1 minute, she's in bed, she's talking to Alan. Everything's going great. They're laughing, they're kidding, they're cuddling a little bit. The very next moment, she's being held against the wall and Alan's trying to protect himself. How completely confusing would this be for her? I couldn't even imagine. Now, Alan, He tried to tell Linda what happened, and she could tell that it was probably true just based on looking him in the eyes and hearing the way that he said it. He was scared.
I don't have any memory of what happened. It's not me. I don't have no evil laugh. I don't do the things that he said I do. That's not my type. Not that type of person. I just don't remember.
Now, many believe that the reason that Linda does not remember what happened was because Kramer took over her body. Some would say that she became possessed. The question that I would maybe ask is, where does these people go when this happens? Like in some stories, people say that they're a witness. They can see what's happening. They can't stop it. They can't control it, but they're there. Others say that they almost go to a different place. They don't know what's going on. We just covered that in last week's case. And then there's others that it's like they're asleep and then they wake up and they're in a completely different spot. Now, in addition to that, you have to think there's two sets of different fears that's going on right now. You've got Alan that's grappling with his new fear of, well, this happened once, it could obviously happen again. And then you have Linda. She's probably scared too. She didn't even have control over her own body. At least not in that moment, she didn't. And for her, it all happened with no warning. It's not like she could say, Alan, there's something coming over me, get away from me, blah, 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 blah. And Alan's parents, oh my gosh, could you imagine their level of concern? Even the skeptic of the family, David, he was now turning towards believing. I mean, after all, he knew Linda. He knew that there was no way that this is how she would act. In addition to that, he knew his son. There's no way that this woman that was half the size of Alan could even remotely attempt to hold him down.
The possibilities in my mind were endless as what might be able to happen. And I really got concerned. And so at that point I said, look, I'm going to go get some help. Somebody somewhere can tell me what the heck is going on.
And David did go out and look for help. He found a spiritualist, which gave him some advice. The first thing that he said to do, though, was to pour salt all around the house. Now, without surprise, this did nothing to stop the haunting that was occurring inside the home. So, the next thing that they decided to do was to have a homegrown exorcism. Basically, an unsanctioned exorcism where they would all just kind of go around the table, say prayers, and tell the entity to leave. He didn't want him there. Go away. Now, according to Sandra, this worked for a few days. It's almost like the haunting slowed down. They thought that they was maybe getting a grip back on their house again. But like all of our stories always do, things started to take a turn for the worse. The entity came back stronger than ever. The house began to reek of a smell. They best described it as being similar to like an old burned out motor. And all four of them that was living inside the house, they started getting headaches that became almost unbearable to deal with. Also, in addition to that, they said some of the rooms that they were staying in started getting ice cold. So cold to where you could almost see your breath. But then, almost as though the haunting was truly trying to evolve, they started hearing whispers, talking. Almost as though it was everywhere, yet nowhere at the same time. Now, none of them could ever make out the voices or what the voices was saying, but there was one thing that was noticeable. There was one woman's voice that was louder than all the rest. It was almost as though she was the leader of the rest of them. Now, probably the most interesting thing that the family could have done, and probably the best advice that anyone could have gave them had they gave them this advice. I think they just came up with it on their own, though. The family started ignoring the voices as well as the other paranormal activity that was happening. They wanted to take back their home. It's often said that the best way to deal with a bully is to ignore them. In essence, this entity was basically just that, a bully. It was trying to get their attention. It wanted to be known, but the family, they wasn't having it. Well, until one evening when David and Sandra was sitting on the couch. David was just sitting there reading his newspaper. Sandra was relaxing. She was making a little small talk with David here and there, mostly when he's flipping between his pages. He looked over at Sandra and he asked, "What time is it?" "Well, it's about 9:30, she said. David didn't know it was 9:30. He explained that he had to get up. His favorite sports show had just started. He got just about as far as the hallway before it hit him.
I stopped right in the middle of a hall. I caught the smell again. "Sandra, tell Isabella to leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with her. Nothing. I'm sick and tired of the smell, the voices, the bells, the noises."
How'd you know her name was Isabella?
Who the heck is Isabella? I know that's what y'all are saying. That's what I said. Now, they both just kind of stood there. They were both super confused. Sandra was confused on, first off, how did David know this name and use it so matter of fact? It's almost as though he knew that she was behind it the entire time. Now, David, he was equally confused. He's like, "I don't even know how I knew this name." How spooky would that be? Tell Isabella to stop it. Wow. But he had a very good explanation of what he thinks it might have been. Tell him about it, David.
I didn't have no explanation for it. Like you get an idea, like a little voice inside your head. Like your consciousness or whatever it is, that little voice you listen to and it tells you to do right and wrong. It said this is Isabella.
Y'all smell that? The smell of a skeptic that is now an absolute believer. Love it. Now, things had been taken way too far for David. Way too far. He didn't expect that at all. So, what's he do? Well, now it's him. He contacts a parapsychologist, which then introduces them to a psychic medium. So the psychic medium, they drop by the house. Now he's talking to the entire family, except for David. David wasn't quite there yet. He's trying to figure out kind of what was happening between the walls of the man's home. Now, they all became very shocked when David entered the room, and he went straight up to David. And one of the first things that came out of his mouth was, "I believe we're being haunted by a spirit named Isabella." What? If you had ever wanted to see the color drain from someone's face, I bet it probably would have been that day with David. He just kind of stood there for a second trying to compose himself and what to say next.
And I was taken aback, and it really surprised me. And I said, "Joshua, there's no way that you could know that the woman in my house is Isabella. There's just no way. Because there's only two people in the world at this time that know that name, and that's Sandra and I. And we haven't known it that long."
Now, Sandra, she was standing on the sideline. She's like, "I need a little bit more information." She wanted to see if the psychic could come up with some type of last name. So he looks down almost as though he's going into some type of a trance. Trance from the other side, almost another dimension. That's probably a good way to put it. As his head lifts up, he looks at David and says, "I see the name Kramer." Oh, baby. For anyone whose memory might not be that great, and I don't know how your memory could not be that great, but if your memory's not that great, that was the name that was given from Melinda and Alan and their friend when they was messing with the Ouija board. But it's just a game though, right? Just a kid's game. Obviously. Now with the revelation of the first name, which David had just gotten just a few days before, and now the last name, Kramer, which was given a few months ago. Oh yeah, the Manns, they lost it. This was now just too real. It's one thing to have to deal with a haunting and kind of question yourself, but now when someone's coming in and confirming it for you, that's a whole new level. Whole new level. Now Linda and Alan, they made this decision. Nope, we're gone. We're leaving. We ain't staying in this house. So they started packing. I mean, why it took this long just blows my mind. They started packing and they started making plans on where to go. And they were almost done. Linda started feeling a little bit brave. They're getting out of here. They're not going to stay in this house. It's almost like she kind of wanted to show a little bit of power over the entity. She began cussing it. Started acting real brave, telling it that it had no power over her or them. Then out of nowhere, Sandra screams.
Evidently, she upset it, 'cause right in mid-sentence of cussing the ghost, light bulb exploded. Lasted maybe half a minute or so, and then the bulb just fizzled out and died.
You know, I went through a lot when I lived there, and I just wanted to hurry up and get up. Wanted to tell her just how I felt before I left, just one last time.
Big shocker here. It's like the rumor mill. It didn't take very long for word of mouth to get around to all the paranormal circles, and the three founders of the Center of Paranormal Studies from Silver Springs, Florida, which was composed of James Bosworth, Russell McCarty, and Andrew Nichols, they all made their way to the house on September 19th of 1992. If there was something that was haunting this house, they wanted to find it. Now, what they experienced from the very onset, let's hear what they had to say about it.
As we drove out to the house, I felt a sort of an emptiness inside. And as I went into the house, the air seemed to get thicker, and it had an odor, and it was uncomfortable.
To be the house, just looking at it, it had a presence that was profoundly unpleasant. Had extreme foul smell. I think I described it in my notes as kind of like rotten flesh.
It definitely had depressive ambiance to it, almost like a depressive type of feeling. After being in the house for several hours, we all began to experience headaches.
With equipment in hand, they moved from room to find whatever was in this home. Now, one thing that was extremely interesting, in Alan and Linda's bedroom, the EMF detectors, they went off the chart. They described it almost as though it was like having a power surge in that room, probably because Linda ticked it off. Good night. She was getting all mouthy with that thing. Now, just understand, this isn't new equipment. This is the same equipment that they had used countless times before in other investigations. Andrew, after noticing that the EMF detector would spike, took two different Polaroid photos. One when the spikes were at the absolute highest, and the second one was after the spike went back down. Now, in the very second photo, or should I say in the second photo, there was absolutely nothing that was abnormal about that photo. It's just a normal shot. In fact, you could see David in the background. He's just hanging out. But the first one, the one during the EMF spike, it was not. For those of you that's watching on the old YouTube machine, take a look at it for yourself. Now, in this photo that was taken, you can make out what almost looks like a form to me, it looks like it's forming, almost like it's a human. But what is it? Was it Isabella? Maybe it was just a glitch in the Polaroid picture. Well, in March of 1993, the picture was sent to Polaroid headquarters to be analyzed. Analysts, they said the shape that was in the foreground, it was not caused by a defect in the film or the camera, either one. The beauty of Polaroid photos is they're very hard to manipulate. But let me ask you, what do you think happened in this story? Do you think it's legit? I'm actually dying to know down in the comments down below. Have you seen this episode of Unsolved Mysteries? Are you going to check it out after you've listened to this podcast? Also, if you're not subscribed, subscribe down below. Stop playing with my emotions like that. Hit the doggone subscribe button. Also, please be sure to check out my other podcasts. I talked about it earlier. I'm just going to hit it here real quick with my co-host, my buddy Nick. It's called Deceptive Reality. Every single week, again, we take on a different unsolved mystery. Well, even though we're closing the chapter on this story, I have many more that's waiting to be created. Again, if you have a story that you want me to tell, please be sure to let me know in the comments down below. Until we see each other again in the next podcast, goodbye. I love me some Unsolved Mysteries, man.